Welcome back to Creepy Chronicles, where we bring you spine-chilling tales that keep you on the edge of your seat. Tonight, we've got a story that will make you think twice about what lurks in the shadows of the countryside. So sit tight and prepare yourself for a terrifying ride. This story is called Whispers from the Cornfields, and believe me, what happens next will leave you breathless. Liam Thompson never expected his life to change so dramatically. At 32, he was living in a small apartment in the city, working a dead-end job at a hardware store. Then, out of the blue, he received a letter that changed everything. His uncle, William Thompson, whom he barely knew, had passed away. William owned a corn farm in a small, isolated town in Kansas, and in his will, he had left everything to Liam. The idea of inheriting a farm intrigued him. He was desperate for a fresh start, and this seemed like the opportunity he had been waiting for. The farm was located in a small town called Ashton, and the nearest grocery store was a 30-minute drive away. But Liam didn't mind. He was ready for a simpler life. Or so he thought. When Liam first arrived at the farm, it looked peaceful enough. The house was old but sturdy. The cornfields stretched far and wide, and the neighbors, though distant, seemed friendly enough. His uncle had lived alone for years, tending to the fields and keeping to himself. What Liam didn't know was that the farm held a dark secret, one that would soon unravel his very sanity. On the first night, Liam felt a sense of unease. The house was quiet, too quiet. Every creak of the old wooden floorboards echoed through the empty halls. As the sun set, the wind picked up, rustling the cornfields just outside his window. The sound was unnerving, but Liam shrugged it off. It was just the wind, or so he told himself. As he lay in bed, he couldn't help but feel like something was watching him. He told himself it was just his imagination, a product of his exhaustion from the move. He turned off the bedside lamp and closed his eyes. But sleep didn't come easy. In the dead of night, he began to hear something strange, a whisper. At first, it was faint, almost like the wind whistling through the corn, but as the night went on, the whispers grew louder. Liam sat up, his heart pounding in his chest. The whispers seemed to be coming from outside, from the fields. He hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should investigate. The logical part of his mind told him to stay in bed, to ignore it. But curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a flashlight and headed outside. As he stepped into the fields, the whispering became clearer. It sounded like a voice, calling his name. The light from his flashlight flickered and the air around him grew colder. What was happening? What was out there? Suddenly, the whispers stopped. Everything went silent. Liam stood frozen, his flashlight shaking in his hand. Then, without warning, a shadow darted through the corn, too fast for him to make out what it was. His heart skipped a beat. He turned and ran back to the house, locking the door behind him. Whatever was out there, it wasn't human. The next morning, Liam decided to ask around town about his uncle. He wanted to know if anyone had experienced anything strange near the farm. He stopped by the local diner, where an old man named Hank seemed to know everyone in Ashton. When Liam mentioned his uncle, Hank's expression changed. "Your uncle, huh?" William was a good man, but he wasn't the same after the accident. Liam frowned. What accident? Hank leaned in closer. Years ago, there was a bad drought. Crops were failing all over the state. But your uncle's farm? His corn grew taller and greener than anyone's. People started talking, saying William had made some kind of deal, with something dark. Liam's stomach turned. What kind of deal? Hank shook his head. No one knows for sure. But after that, strange things started happening. People in town said they heard voices coming from the fields at night. Whispers, like the corn was alive. And your uncle, well, he stopped talking to folks. Kept to himself after that. Liam left the diner feeling more uneasy than ever. What had his uncle done? And why was he hearing the whispers now? That evening, Liam found an old journal in his uncle's study. The pages were yellowed with age, the ink faded, but the words were still legible. As he flipped through the journal, one entry caught his eye. The corn is thriving. The deal was made, but at what cost? The whispers grow louder each night. It won't be long now. The entity wants what it's owed. Liam's blood ran cold. His uncle had made a deal with something, but he hadn't fulfilled his end of the bargain. And now the entity was coming for him, or for Liam. As the sun set and darkness fell over the farm, the whispers returned. Louder this time. Closer. Liam could feel the presence of something in the fields, watching, waiting. He knew he had to find out what the entity wanted, but the fear of confronting it was overwhelming. Liam's only hope was to leave the farm. He packed a bag, grabbed his car keys, and prepared to drive away. But as he stepped outside, he saw something that made his heart stop. Figures, shadowy, indistinct, stood at the edge of the cornfields, watching him. The whispers filled the air, louder than ever. Panic set in. He jumped into his car and started the engine, but as he sped down the dirt road, the shadows followed. No matter how fast he drove, they were always just behind him. The whispers grew deafening, as if the entity itself was inside his head, calling his name. Suddenly, the car skidded to a stop. The engine died. Liam frantically tried to restart it, but it was no use. He was stranded, alone, in the middle of nowhere. Liam had no choice but to return to the farm. He had to face whatever was haunting him, or it would never stop. He walked back to the house, the shadows following close behind. The whispers were now constant, like a chorus of voices surrounding him. When he reached the cornfields, he saw something that made his blood run cold. His uncle, or what was left of him, stood in the center of the field. His face was twisted in agony, his body decayed and broken. The deal was never fulfilled, the voice whispered. The corn must be fed. Liam realized, with horror, that the entity demanded a sacrifice. His uncle had tried to escape it, but in the end, the entity took him. And now, it wanted Liam. The ground beneath Liam's feet began to tremble. The cornfield seemed to come alive, the stalks reaching out towards him. He tried to run, but the corn wrapped around his legs, pulling him deeper into the field. Liam fought with everything he had, but it was no use. The entity was too powerful. As the corn closed in around him, the whispers grew louder, more frantic. The entity was desperate to complete the deal. In his final moments, Liam realized the truth. The corn had been thriving for years, but at a terrible cost. The entity had been feeding on the souls of those who lived on the farm, and now it had come for him. What happened next was terrifying. Liam struggled to pull himself free from the grip of the corn. His heart pounded as he gasped for air. The whispers grew louder, filling his head with words he couldn't understand. Fear surged through him, but he knew he couldn't give up. He had to escape no matter what. With a desperate push, Liam managed to free one leg from the corn's tight hold. The stalk snapped as he yanked himself loose, stumbling forward. His body felt heavy, the air pressing down on him as if something was watching, waiting for him to fall. He glanced towards the farmhouse, the only place that might offer any protection. It wasn't far, but each step felt harder than the last. The cold crept in, chilling him to the bone. Shadows danced between the corn, shifting and twisting like dark figures moving just out of sight. He felt their eyes on him, the whispers turning more frantic, urging him to stop. But he couldn't. He had to keep going. Finally, he reached the front porch of the farmhouse. His legs ached, and his breath came in short, panicked gasps. He grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, slamming it shut behind him. For a moment, the house felt safe, as if the thick walls could keep the horrors outside. But Liam knew better. The whispers were already inside his head, and the dark presence was everywhere. He backed away from the door, his hands shaking. The old wooden floor creaked under his weight, and the silence of the house felt wrong, almost too quiet. His eyes darted around the room, looking for any sign of the entity. His uncle's journal lay on the table where he'd left it earlier, the pages still open to that haunting entry. "The corn must be fed." The words echoed in his mind. His uncle had made a deal, but Liam didn't know what that deal was, only that it involved the corn. And now the entity wanted him just like it had wanted his uncle. The thought made his stomach twist with fear. Suddenly, the floorboards groaned behind him. Liam spun around, his heart racing. At the far end of the hallway, he saw a shadowy figure standing just beyond the kitchen doorway. Its form was blurry, as if it was made from the darkness itself. The figure took a slow step toward him, and Liam felt frozen in place. His breath hitched, his body refusing to move. The whispers grew louder again, swirling in his mind like a storm. He couldn't understand the words, but he felt their pull, urging him to give in, to let go. But then a memory flashed in his mind. His uncle's journal. The last words his uncle had written, the ones Liam hadn't paid enough attention to. "The entity will take what it is owed, but there is still a way to break the cycle. The corn cannot thrive forever." Liam's heart leapt with a small spark of hope. There had to be something in the journal, something he hadn't seen yet that could help him. He darted toward the table, snatching up the journal and flipping through the pages. His hands shook as he searched, the shadow in the hallway moving closer. Just as the shadow neared the kitchen doorway, Liam found what he was looking for. A short passage, buried in the middle of a page, written in hurried, shaky handwriting. "Fire. It fears fire. The corn can burn. That's the only way." His breath caught in his throat. Fire. The corn had thrived on the darkness, on the deal, but it could be destroyed. He had to set it ablaze. But how? He needed gasoline, matches, anything that could help him. The shadow was closer now, almost at the doorway. Liam knew he had no time to waste. He shoved the journal into his pocket and sprinted towards the back of the house. In the small shed behind the farmhouse, his uncle had kept cans of gasoline for the tractor. If he could get to the shed, he might stand a chance. Bursting through the back door, Liam ran across the yard, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The cold air bit at his skin, and the whispers followed him, relentless. He could feel the shadow closing in behind him, faster now, as if it knew what he was planning. Liam reached the shed and flung the door open. His hands fumbled in the dark until they found the cold metal of the gasoline cans. He grabbed two and rushed back outside. The cornfields loomed just ahead, swaying unnaturally in the night. He could feel the entity's presence more than ever, as if the corn itself was alive, watching his every move. With shaking hands, Liam doused the edge of the field with gasoline, the pungent smell filling the air. He glanced over his shoulder. The shadow was there, standing at the edge of the yard, watching him. Its form seemed to ripple and stretch, dark tendrils reaching out towards him. Liam pulled the matches from his pocket, his fingers trembling so badly he could barely strike one. Finally, a flame flickered to life. For a moment he hesitated, the fear of what would happen next gripping him tightly, but he had no choice. With a deep breath, he tossed the match into the field. The flames roared to life instantly, racing across the dry corn stalks. The heat surged, and the air crackled as the fire consumed the field. The whispers turned to screams, piercing and desperate, as if the very soul of the entity was being burned away. Liam stumbled back, watching in horror as the shadow writhed in agony, its form twisting and breaking apart in the glow of the fire. The flames climbed higher, devouring everything in their path. The cornfields, the source of the darkness, were being destroyed. The whispers faded, growing weaker with each passing second, until there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the distant howl of the wind. Liam stood there, breathing heavily, his heart still racing. The shadows were gone, the entity defeated, at least for now. The corn was no more, and with it, the hold the darkness had on the farm. But as he watched the flames die down, a single thought crept into his mind. Was it truly over? Like and subscribe to our channel for more horror stories.